introduction about Shamil. So we have guest of Honor TechTalk Series, May webinar. We have Shamil Ibragimov. Shamil Ibragimov is the Director of Research, MIT Kuo Sharper Center of Prosperity and Entrepreneurship. So he highly experienced a professional with 20 years experience in the field of intersection of science, technology, global strategy, focusing on how innovation ecosystem are built and regions like Central Asia can transform into competitive hubs for growth, entrepreneurship, and technological advancement. He also previously served as executive director of Soros Foundation in Kyrgyzstan and proud alumni of Harvard and Yale University. He works emphasizing bridging MIT and Central Asia, advancing social innovation, and promoting responsible investment to support sustainable and inclusive regional development. I want to thank you for listening, and with that, I will allow Shamil to share his screen. Thank you, Shamil. Sorry for taking a long time.
Thank you, Gillian. Thank you, Serik, for this introduction. I have to confess that I'm probably one of the least academic people in this community because I'm not PhD, and my background is mostly in practice rather than in research. But this vicissitudes of destiny, as I call it, brought me to where I am now at MIT, leading the research work. Okay, I made a pretty simple presentation. I don't want to overload you, with the work that I do, because as far as I understand, the purpose of this call is not just to present the research work, but rather to discuss the career path and the region and how we can all collaborate. So let me start with the get back again, like who am I? As you can see in my very, very short CV here, indeed, it's mostly practical path, right? So I graduated Kyrgyz National University International Relations with a major in international relations. And my career started with the enterprise development project. So initially, like in 2002, when I graduated from the university, I wanted to work on something big on international level. And that was my Northern Star, along the whole career. But along the way, I start adding some other purposes, not just, I want to work on international level. That was just the level of engagement, but the purpose was evolving along the way. And the first two, the USAID Enterprise Development Project and TFI International, that's our like purely business areas. TFI International, that was a construction company, and we built probably like 60% of the Manas Air Base, US Gansi Air Base in Kyrgyzstan, in Manas Airport. But in 2009, I decided that I want to do something bigger than just making money, just doing business. And that's when I joined Eurasia Foundation. And then there was a call for executive director of the Open Society Foundation in Kyrgyzstan. It's known as Soros Foundation. And I believe that Soros Foundation, Eurasia Foundation and Soros Foundation, and then Harvard, these three elements that shaped my vision of what I want to dedicate my life to in the next, like whatever time I have on this planet. And that was a very transformative experience. And in 2022, I resigned from Open Society Foundation and was admitted to Yale University as a Yale World Fellow. And this is another fantastic opportunity. I would highly recommend anyone who would find themselves in an inflection point when you discover that, okay, you need to do something different. You want to do, you need a different lens, and time to reflect what is next in your life. Yale World Fellowship is designed for that moment, for this kind of people, and that was perfectly fit my needs because I was a little bit lost, like when I resigned from Open Society Foundation. And one of the results of this fellowship was like when I was back in Kyrgyzstan for a couple of months, I founded Portal College for Game Development and Interactive Media. That's a first of its kind in Central Asia college that is focusing to educate kids how to make video games, how to create interactive media. And that's, I believe, is a perfect combination of technology and creativity. And this is exactly what we have to cultivate in the time of this technological disruption and uncertainty. And in 2024, I joined the Legatum Center, MIT Legatum Center. That's a previous name of the same center that I work now. That is called now MIT Kuo Sharper Center. And my fundamental goal was, I let me say this way, because it would be interesting, I believe, for the audience to understand what was the driver of my switch from civil society development into innovation and entrepreneurship. Over 15 years at least, my fundamental goal was to advance and support civil society development, open society in Kyrgyzstan and across Central Asia. But then I realized that probably we have to find another leverage, to advance those values and focus not just on civil society, that quite often is very politicized, quite often has a tremendous pressure from the governments. But I discovered that there is actually another power that might be transformative, but not yet transformative for the society. That's entrepreneurs, and that is why I start studying, the role of entrepreneurship, and I cultivated some ideas that I applied in my research. And when I came to MIT Legatum Center, I actually proposed them an idea. I said, like, listen, the Legatum Center is working heavily in Africa. I mean, like 90% of the off-campus programs that the Legatum Center was implementing were focusing on Africa. Fair enough, there is a huge need, but at the same time, I came with an idea that there is another untapped region, which is called Central Asia, or you can expand it to like Central Asia and Caucasus. I rarely use the word Eurasia. I think there is a little political sentiment around that. So that is why I personally use the definition of Central Asia and Caucasus. And I started advancing this idea, and it was supported by the High Technology Park, who invested in me in the center to conduct the research. I think that Galim and Serik mentioned already, and we'll get to this soon. So the overall idea was to research and understand what the Central Asia looks like in the context of innovation and entrepreneurship. And one of the arguments that I built is that nowadays we witness, tremendous growth, economic growth, all over the world. And if you can see my screen, you could notice that like all those countries that are listed here that have at least 6% growth, annual growth, are the countries in what we call like emerging markets, developing markets, global south. We like, we don't use these definitions. We call them growth markets because growth is happening there. The only European country that we can see here is Ireland, right? And Ireland shows like 9.1% growth. But again, And we can see that some countries like Kyrgyzstan is like 8% growth, right? Uzbekistan 6.8% growth, and the Tajikistan is also, it's here, yes. Tajikistan 7.5% growth, and that's great. That's tremendous, especially comparing with the Western Hemisphere, where the projection is like from 2 to 2.4% GDP growth rate, right? Sounds cool, but there is a fundamental problem in this, that growth doesn't mean prosperity. That growth might be on its own. And here, even on this chart, we can see that Sudan, for example, showed like 24.3% growth. I mean, like, wow. But it's mostly driven by the oil export, right? So it's actually still the same colonial paradigm of development of this growth when the oil is extracted and exported, right? And here as well, like on the fourth place, we can see Ireland, 9.1%, and Ireland's growth has been largely driven by the pharmaceutical projects, pharmaceutical products, with a high level of value added. So even on this chart, we can see that growth might be different, right? Especially when there are weak institutions. There is a big question if this growth and the wealth that this growth generate actually diffused among the general population. Does it actually generate some internal capacity of the country? What we call is, in my recent paper that I'm working on now, I introducing these two concepts. One is transactional activity and productive capacity. Transactional activity is what I would call the situation in South Sudan or in Nigeria. When a country demonstrates some growth, right? They extract some revenue, some minerals, oil, you name it. They sell it. Yes, the growth happens. The GDP raise, great. That may be even referred to Kyrgyzstan, for example, my country, that where the growth is mostly driven by investments in residential construction service, in residential construction, and in the trade. You know, when people buy, you know, like some products from China, from Europe, and then export it through Russia. That I would call transactional activity, because yes, the growth happens, the money flow in and flow out, but does this growth actually contributes into productive capacity? And by productive capacity, we can refer here to Ireland, their capacity to actually build this, to actually create new products, reinvest in R&D, and so on. And this is what we call innovation-driven entrepreneurship. So here, discussing and researching the drivers of growth, we understand that growth might be different. Growth might be harmful. Growth might be unequal. Growth might be whatever, you know, like whatever, but not contributing to prosperity. So this is what we actually trying to challenge in our work as MIT Kuo Sharper Center for Prosperity and Entrepreneurship. We believe that it is time to rethink the paradigm of development. And this is where we make a bet, let's say, on innovation and entrepreneurship, on innovative entrepreneurs who create something new. And we believe that it is possible. The old narratives tell us that, oh, the deep tech, you know, that innovation, R&D, only possible, you know, like in well-established economies, in the US and in Europe, you know, you name it. But this is not true. We see a number of companies, we have a strong evidence that says that no, actually, deep tech happens in what we call growth markets. The question is like, it's not enough. We have to enhance it. And here is where we get to the next point. How can we create ecosystem and preconditions for those innovations to thrive? And here I don't want to go into like specific details, but like let me briefly cover what I'm working on, and then we'll can switch to the questions, but I believe that would be more interesting for the people. So in general, again, back like why the growth happens, because like the biggest population is in Asia. It is in Africa. That's where the majority like of the world population lives, and that's relatively young. In the case of Africa, it's not relatively, it is young population with an average age like early 20s. Across Central Asia, the average age is 28. And in the next couple of decades, we will increase, like by 2050, Central Asia will reach 100 million. This is the projection, 100 million population. In Africa, it also shows like tremendous growth. And both, let's say Africa and Central Asia, facing one fundamental challenge. And the fundamental challenge is that we need to create more jobs, because in the next couple of decades, just in Central Asia, we have to create around at least 1 million jobs every year. In Africa, they have to create like millions and millions of jobs every year, because that's the new generation that grows up and they entering the labor market. And with the current structure of our economies, there is no way we can meet those demands. So the question is like, okay, what might be the drivers that can create those jobs, that can improve the productivity of those people? And the answer in our case, this is what we stand for, is innovative entrepreneurship. So this is like the general statistics that I'm sure there is no need to explain like why Central Asia and so on, but like why research Central Asia? And here is some statistics, right? So this is world's 60 most innovative economies. We see that Central Asia is just like a terra incognita, as well as Africa. Does it mean there is nothing happens? No, there is a lot happens in those parts of the world, in Latin America, in Africa, in Central Asia, in Mongolia, here in Southeast Asia. The problem is not that nothing is happening there, that we cannot call them innovative economies. The problem is we don't know what's going on there. We do not generate enough knowledge. We do not capture this knowledge. And this is exactly my work at MIT Kuo Sharper Center as a director of research, is to generate, to assist to generate this knowledge and to capture this knowledge. And by generation of the knowledge, I mean like the fundamental research, like when you collect the data and you create knowledge that didn't exist. When you do interviews, surveys and so on, you create knowledge. And then we publish it. Capturing knowledge is a different, is something when we capture existing knowledge, and in our case, that's business case studies, and we write, on business case studies like on companies in Africa. I hope soon we'll get to Central Asia and we'll write on Central Asian companies, and that would be another source of knowledge for students at MIT to understand, well, actually, there are some interesting developments happening in this part of the world we have zero knowledge about. So one hat that I have is my position as a director of research, and I work across the globe. I work with Africa, I work with Central Asia, with Southeast Asia. I hope we'll expand our work in Latin America. The second hat that I have is advancing the work in Central Asia. I'm building a bridge between Central Asia and MIT, and I hope that this year we will launch a big program with Uzbekistan, and I hope that we will expand it to this work to Central Asia. So again, talking about the knowledge of the market, like this is a map of the venture capital attractiveness index. It's a little bit outdated, 2023, but again, you can see that like Uzbekistan is not even on the map. This is not the case probably now. They released a lot of data, and I hope that there is an updated index that includes Uzbekistan, and I'm sure it will have like probably the best attractiveness level in Central Asia. But so far, we can see that in 2023, Central Asia is not that attractive. Africa is not that attractive, right? We don't know what's like, we don't even have like for most parts of Africa, what is the level of their attractiveness, the same refers to Central Asia. So this is the answer, like why we have to study Central Asia, why we have to raise the voice of the region and take the stage. And every year in April, usually in like 20s of April, we host a big conference here at MIT, MIT Kuo Sharper Center. The conference is built to focus on innovation, entrepreneurship, and growth markets. And I invite everybody who is here to join us next year for this conference. I would love to see more people from the region on the stage of MIT to speak, to raise our voice, and to demonstrate that we have something to share, we have something to show. That's very important, to take a stage on the global map of innovations. And why to innovate? This is probably my last concept piece that I will refer to because I don't want to be too boring for you. But like, why innovative entrepreneurship? And here again, like, I'm happy that we have here all the academics and researchers, so we can speak academic language. And I refer to the work of Joseph Schumpeter, who created this concept of Schumpeterian entrepreneurship and brought this definition of creative destruction, which is a process where new innovation replace outdated industries, products, and technologies. Yes, in the context of individual enterprise, that's harmful. Not harmful, it's painful. When your competitors take over your business because they are more innovative, they bring something new, new technologies, and so on. But in general, for civilization, for the markets, that's a good thing. The creative destruction is a process where innovators, innovative entrepreneurs, they are constantly redesign, reshape the market, technologies, and they create constantly something new. And yes, as a result, the outdated technologies, they fall out, they die. But that's the price that you pay for the real growth. That's the price that you pay for the real innovation that happens. And this is my research that I published last year, in January last year. That's an ecosystem for innovation-driven entrepreneurship. It is a comparative analysis of Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. I didn't include, unfortunately, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, mostly because of the data scarcity in those countries. And so I had to limit it to these three countries. And you can find it on our website. So I will not go too deep into the research because, like, that's where you can study MIT Innovation Ecosystem Model. I explain in my paper what's it all about, and how you analyze it. And then the framework to analyze innovation ecosystem. And here, this is what you can find in my research, the comparative analysis on different data and so on. Let me stop here because, yeah, I believe 40 minutes of my talk is more than enough. And let's switch to answers and questions, and I'm happy
Shamil
to be useful.
appreciated. Yeah, Shamil appreciated about the yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, Shamil, it was a great talk. Really happy to listen to your work, what you exactly doing, and it's really amazing that this shift from Africa to Central Asia that you bring to this center, and now you're pushing this field. And we're very welcome to people from this chat to recommend if you're doing research and want to join Shamil's team, please apply and ask. So Shamil, here's a few questions from audience pre-submitted. So you said about this, it's mainly about Central Asian focus. I think very relevant for us. What's the biggest untapped opportunity for innovation in Central Asia today? This is the first question. And second one, how can, let's say, diaspora, let's say Kyrgyz diaspora or Uzbek diaspora or scientists or entrepreneur abroad contribute meaningfully to this ecosystem development in their home country? Thank you.
Let me answer. Let me give you one answer to these two questions because they are interconnected.
Mm,
I believe that the fundamental gap that we have in Central Asia is to unlock this internal capacity for innovation. And what I mean, we have researchers, we
mm,
have scientists who work on different domains. The problem is that, and I believe that's a legacy of the Soviet system that was very centralized, especially in terms of the science. It was very centralized and very closed that we never built a proper connection between science and entrepreneurship,
mm,
right? I wrote another op-ed like a few months ago that where I try to address exactly this point, and let me explain what the point is. Like the inflection point in technological race between the US and the Soviet Union happened in 1971 when the Soviet Union and the United States were more or less equal rivals, in developing computers, in developing all those technologies. But in 1971, when the United States, by the demand of the market, start focusing mostly on microchips that would allow them to build individual laptops,
mm,
the Soviet Union decided, it was since it was centralized, they were like,
mm,
there is no need for microchips because there is no need for the individual laptops and so on. They didn't see this. They decided to focus on bigger, more fundamental
mm,
technology. And that was the bifurcation point, in technology when the US followed the market and
mm,
they ended up, investing and developing mostly, in microchips and so on, and ended up with laptops and so on, while the Soviet Union took a different path. And eventually this different path was a dead end, you know.
mm, mm,
And that's just an example of two different approaches with a market driven and centralized approach. And that is why I always stand for market driven. That probably might be less efficient, in a short term, but more uh, livable in the long term. So this is the legacy that we still have in Central Asia, that the science is separated from the market. So the biggest then question is how we can transform the science, how we can connect the science, this R&D, enhance it and connect it to the market, to entrepreneurs. How we connect those two kinds of minds. And in my research, you will find one of the most disturbing data that is about the R&D expenditures. The average R&D expenditure in Central Asia is 0.14% of GDP. Just for comparison, like Israel has 6% GDP. South Korea has 4.5% GDP. Don't quote me because I might be wrong in details, that my like 2 years old data. But my point is that we are heavily underfunding our R&D capacity. We do not invest properly. And it's not just increasing R&D, it's about finding the proper way how to invest in R&D, to find the proper domains to invest. Where is the comparative advantage of our markets where we can allocate our very limited resources, for R&D? This is what my research is about. It doesn't give you, the blueprint. It highlights the problem, but understanding the problem is already half way to the solution of the problem. This is what I believe. And that's my answer to your questions.
Thank you, Shamil. Yeah, I think it's definitely this system differences. It makes sense, and still in some countries it still continue, but overall, some countries are also trying to kind of like differentiate these two pathways. Shamil, another question is about MIT ecosystem and translation. So you at MIT Kuo Sharper Center for Prosperity and Entrepreneurship, what's the most important lessons from MIT ecosystem that can realistically can be transferred to regions like Central Asia? Your insights.
I think it's not just about ecosystem. I believe that we are quite often focusing more on tangible, technical solutions of very adaptive challenges. What I mean by adaptive challenges, and this is a reference to adaptive leadership from Harvard Kennedy School concept, is that when you try to build something that is too complex, you have to understand what is the complexity, what is the complexity of the problem. Let me say this way: there are two kinds of problems: technical problems and adaptive challenges. Technical problem is when you have a leak in your pipe, right? So that's a problem. You know how to fix it, right? You know how to fix, I don't know, like any technical problem, because there is a technical solution for that. But quite often we're facing adaptive problem. By adaptive problems, what I mean is like improving quality of education in Kazakhstan, in Kyrgyzstan, you name it. There is no technical solution to this very adaptive problem because like the problem is that our governments quite often approach adaptive challenges with the technical solutions. They're like, oh, there is a declining quality of education. Let's build more schools. That's not enough. Yes, we need infrastructure for sure. But what about educating teachers? What about improving curriculums? What about building academic programs that are more adaptive and flexible in this fast changing world? There is no technical solution. You cannot improve education just by building schools. If that would be that simple, there wouldn't be a problem. So this is the fundamental point that one to your question, the mindset. We have to work on the mindset of entrepreneurs, of researchers as well, and most importantly, of the government officials, of policymakers who have to understand, you know, that it's not just the prerogative of the government to build everything on their own, that they have to be inclusive, they have to engage different stakeholders. So that is why, like, what I'm working now is a series of workshop on public policy for innovation that are designed, that will be designed to equip policymakers, entrepreneurs, corporate sector, risk capital providers, all those stakeholders, how to think about innovation ecosystem development in the context of public policy and to educate all those stakeholders that quite often you don't need uh, formal authority to practice your leadership, that you are capable to practice your leadership with that authority that you have. And it might be informal authority, which is expressed in the trust of people that supports you. And what you are doing, what the Global Central Asia Association, Science and Technology Association does, is exactly that. That's exactly the practice of leadership. Without formal authority, you build this authority. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Shamil. Really enjoyed your answer. I think it's very insightful about this like non-governmental but private sector and pushing initiatives and to a kind of driving force. Shamil, another question from audience. We know here's a lot of PhDs, postdocs, and young researchers here. I just want to know, since you have new position, congratulations with that. And what's your future strategy of 5 years and like field of research and development? Will you continue that pathways that you are doing, or you want to evolve or open new markets or new fields? I know you closely working with Uzbekistan IT Park and Kyrgyzstan IT Park. What kind of research will be evolving in 5 years with your current position? Thank you.
Well, it depends on many factors. I definitely want to stay in this field. You know, it will be changing, it will be evolving as long as we have resources to do this. And along the way, I believe that it will be changing, it will be evolving. We'll be learning something new. In my strategic research plan, I outlined it that we have to study the regions, we have to study different practices, and then incorporate them back into our workshops, in our curriculums, because we work with MIT students as well, we educate them. And the fundamental goal for us is to constantly iterate this process. So there is another cool concept that I learned at Harvard, is a problem-driven iterative adaptation. When you approach those very complex problems, with some solutions, you test them, you learn from them, you adapt to what you learn, and then you repeat it again. So this is like a vicious circle, cycle where you repeat, you learn, you adapt, and you repeat again, and so on. So this is what we have to understand. There is no like one silver bullet, that, oh, we will do this, we will fix this, and everything will work. No. Tomorrow there will be another technology. Tomorrow we'll face another challenges. Since we have only 10 minutes left, I want to raise another very important question that Galim you mentioned in your previous question. Uh, I believe that one of the fundamental mind shifts that we have to make in Central Asia, especially when we speak about uh, innovative entrepreneurship, that in Central Asia mostly perceived as startups, and I don't agree that. And this is what we discussed with Ilyas in our last podcast, right? I believe we have to expand the idea of innovations, not to limit it to startups. And what I believe we have to advance the idea that innovative entrepreneurship should be driven by a problem they're focusing on, that they want to solve. And the problem is local one. You know, in Central Asia, we have a bunch of problems in energy sector, in water management, in agriculture and climate adaptation, and so on. And these are the challenges that are not unique for Central Asia. They are universal globally, right? But I see quite often startups that are like focusing on something, like some ideas that are scalable, sexy, like, oh, we have AI, let's apply AI here and there, like, yes, but why? What is the purpose of that? Just to make money. So we have to build this mind shift, like And that is why like we have to build more conversations like this, because this is how we change the narratives about who we are, what we are capable of, and what we have to do. That's my point.
Yeah, Shamil, thank you. And really highly recommend this last interview of Shamil and Ilyas. I think it's a lot of insight and highly recommend to watch that. So last two questions. We have, so Eric, is it possible to unmute yourself and ask a question? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shamil. Very, very interesting. I appreciate your insights here. I just have a general question on your thoughts, because as you mentioned, the funding, limited funding from governments is essentially a political question of where they decide to spend it on. And just your thoughts on the right mix. There's no right mix, but your thoughts on fundamental versus applied research. We always talk about applied research, of course, for being closer to the market. But on the other hand, you also don't want to give up some of the basic research that then could make the applied research possible down the road. So, do you have any thoughts on that, on a correct mix for the governments here about fundamental versus applied?
Thank you, Eric. I believe that, as you rightly mentioned, there is no one right answer, but the approach that we have to choose, I think that the governments or those people in power who allocate those resources, they need to understand where is the comparative advantage of the ecosystem is. For example, like it should be based on several factors, like is the human capital. Do we actually have people, do we have infrastructure to conduct those fundamental research, and how this fundamental research actually fit into the broader strategy and the market needs, because we cannot build everything. It's like we have to be very strategic, and in order to be that strategic, we have to engage others. We have to engage people from the industry. We have to engage entrepreneurs. We have to engage academia. We have to engage experts from the world. And here, let me use this moment to say that in the conference that we had last week, we actually come up with an idea to create a consortium of universities that are focusing on deep tech. So this is exactly, Eric, to your point, like how we can approach this. I believe that we have to build those coalitions when we exchange ideas, and when we seek for potential collaboration and cooperation to use each other's infrastructure, exchange human capital, ideas, and so on. And that would be also, like the way how we identify that balance, like what is the priority for us? You rightly mentioned this is a very politicized question, because the major constraint with the politics is that the politicians, they want to see very fast results, right? That's their constraint, because with every elections they have to report how the money that they allocated here and there, like benefited the society. And that's a very challenging question. So how to address this challenging question is to build the proper balance, of those fast results, and laying the foundation for the long lasting results as well. And that's, again, that's built on conversations, that built on the engagement of multiple stakeholders to do that. That's what is missed so far, I believe, on the national level markets and on the regional market.
Great. Thank you very much.
Eric, thank you for your question. And Vladimir, you can write your question in the chat box. So we're going to the next question, last one. So Baljan from Europe. Baljan, please, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? So with that, we will finish our Q&A section.
Hi, my name is Borjan. I wanted to ask the question about the geopolitics, but most of them you actually answered with this. But I would like to see your opinion about what about the current geopolitics of the region's development, and what do you think how this deglobalization and protectionism actually influence on the region's development in general? Like just a few words, your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Barjan. I had this one slide in my first version of the presentation, but then I decided to remove it because I thought it would be overwhelming. But it's in my paper that I'm working on now. One of the biggest challenges is that now what we see is a disruption of the supply chains, right? We see that the countries that build their economic growth on those supply chains, on those trades, are actually quite often heavily dependent, on those disruptions, on U.S. politics, with the tariff war and so on. And for many, this uncertainty became a new permanent element in their equations. How to keep their ventures, their economies running. So I believe that, I absolutely agree that this, deglobalization is actually affecting us, and its effects through the disruption of the supply chains. Then there will be a question how we can build more resilient economies. And that's again back to the question of innovative entrepreneurs, because governments by default are not innovative. Entrepreneurs are innovative, they have more capacity to do that. So the question is like how to give innovative entrepreneurs more freedom and more space to experiment and to implement those ideas that can mitigate those risks of disrupted, broken supply chains. That's probably my answer to your question, because the problem is there for sure. The way how we approach it, I believe that might be innovative entrepreneurship.
Baujan, thank you for your question. Shamil, appreciate your answer. So with that, we finished our session. And before we end, maybe Serik, do you want something to add? Shamil, last words?
Yes, sure. Well, what a discussion we had today. I really enjoyed the topic which Shamil raised during today's presentation, and the question which we had today are really important for our region. So I can feel so until now the Central Asia region was like a sort of periphery of global innovation, but now it might be the center of like world discussion, hopefully. And I really appreciate that Shamil becoming a bridge between our region and a famous institution. We hope for a future insights. And before Shamil give us final words, I also would like to thank to our audience who find the time to join our today seminar. So we are hoping you join our future seminars. And again, so let's give a round of applause to Shamil for his great presentation and discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Papa.
Thank you, Serik, Golim, for your invitation, and everybody who asked their questions. I couldn't answer all the questions. And I want to thank, the association, for this initiative. As I said, like I believe this is the way how we can build the new narratives, and how we should build the new narratives, and how we should take the stage on the global arena of innovation. And I hope that Well, I would say this way, if there are any ideas on research in this context, not like fundamental scientific research, that's a different path, but in the context of innovation ecosystem, in the context of innovative entrepreneurship and our markets, I'm happy to discuss it, how we can build this research and how we can work together. Right now, we made this announcement during the conference last week that I'm start working with a group of our researchers from the region to build a AI readiness assessment report for Central Asia and Caucasus. So this kind of research would be great to expand. So, but no strings attached. This is just an opportunity that we are open, and I hope that once we launch the big program with Uzbekistan, that might be a gateway to develop more research for Central Asia.
Thank you, Shamil. With that, I really appreciate. I apologize that we cannot answer all the questions. Please, you can send your question to us. So with that, we appreciate today we had Guest of Honor TechTalk Series. It's a monthly event that we host amazing guest speakers that share working intersection of science, technology, and global strategy. So we thank you for your time, and Shamil, appreciate. Congratulations with position, and wish you all the best on your new role. Thank you, Shamil. Thank you, everyone, for joining. You are a great role model for other Kyrgyz scientists here.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.